Hello and welcome to UX Research Geeks. I'm your host Tina Lichkova, a researcher and a strategist, and this podcast is brought to you by UX Tweak, an all-in-one UX research tool. This is the 8th episode of UX Research Geeks with the one and only Michaela Mora, the founder of Relevant Insight. Michaela is an insight professional with a diverse background and more than 20 years of experience working at the intersection of market research and UX research. She's also a founding member of the Multicultural Insight Collective, which conducts research about topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Michaela has working experience from internal research team at Match.com and Blockbuster Online, and from research agencies in the US, Sweden, and Cuba. I am a pretty big fan of Michaela, following her for quite a while on LinkedIn, where she is debunking myths around research methodologies and explaining market research methods to its core. In this talk, we spoke about the importance of formal education, as well as the problem auditing that she's doing with her clients, and why we should dig big into the market research methodology, why personas with a demographic information are still a very worthy tool. Tune in into a solid portion of wisdom from Michaela.
Hello, Michaela.
Hello.
Hello. We always start, and I think it's a good opportunity for you also to tell the listeners a little bit more context about you. So my first question would be, what is now in your life important to say about you and your work?
What is important to say about me and my work? Well, I have been working at the intersection of market research and UX research for more than 20 years. And I have seen the evolution of the field for a long time. I do both qualitative and quantitative research and been doing UX research before it was called UX. It was just research. And we know our fields are going in a little bit different direction and against a lot of collaborations, which should be the other way around. And that's the piece that I'm very much involved with in trying to communicate that we need to collaborate because there's so many synergies. When those two groups don't collaborate in companies, a fragmented view of the customer comes out that really diminishes the value of research. And so we need that to be able to help our businesses to make good decisions. The business, what they call it, stakeholders in UX, in market research, they are called decision makers. Business decision maker could be the management team, could be the product team, could be the marketing team. Whoever really makes a decision, usually researchers are kind of on the support role, guidance and give them insights and trying to help them implement, but they are not ultimately many times the ones making the actual decision. And so that's the connection to the business outcome is sometimes what's also missing in some of the UX research when it's done. Right now, I'm seeing the evolution of the field over time, and that's where I'm at. So I do a lot of work across many different industries, both traditional market research and UX research. I don't see the division as others see it because I have worked in practice in an integrated model, and I try to guide clients for that perspective. It doesn't matter where they come from, which group they're working with. The approach to research is similar, even if they think it's not. There are some specificities, but the way you approach it in terms of defining objectives, finding the methodology, doing the analysis, regardless of the method, that's the principles of research that I really support.
And this is also the reason because I told you that I am in love with your LinkedIn posts and comments. When people are bashing some methods or some kind of methodologies, I find out that you step in and very nicely are vocal about it, why it shouldn't be bashed or why it makes sense and why people should look into market research. But when we talked about this integration, why is it for UX researcher so important in your opinion to look into market research, and what are we missing out if we don't do it?
Well, I always come back to the textbook definition of market research. I'm a trained researcher, formally trained. I have a master's in market research. So it's not like I went to a boot camp and then figure out. I have been doing this for a long time, and I always come back to it because sometimes people don't know where that comes from. And the textbook definition of it is the identification, collection, analysis, and use of information to make business decisions. I'm not talking about any methods in particular. I'm talking about what the goal is. Because research is always about information needs So you have to separate business problem and research problem. The business problem has to do with, is focused on action, what the business needs to do, what the decision makers, what the stakeholders need to do just to move forward, whatever the decision could be in product development, could be in sales, marketing. And the researchers is about how you translate that problem, business problem, into an information need. So what do I need to know to be able to help you, a stakeholder, to make a decision? And so that context of the business is something that really is important in any research, market research, UX research, because if we don't connect it to it, the business is not going to invest in research. That's the basic idea. I mean, we are interested, of course, we are a voice for customers, for users. We want to improve their experience. But if that insights about the user experience, about improvement of the products or whatever, doesn't help the business to move forward, or at least stay in business, even non-profit organizations need to make money to support their operations. If they don't stay in business, they won't have money to pay your salary and invest in the resources that you need as a researcher. And so the context of the business outcomes, where research lives, how it's connected to the business goals is important. That's at the core of market research, right? That's the business problem. That's the context, right? And remember, marketing, sometimes people get stuck in the terms because they have not studied the field. Market research is a multidisciplinary field. Product is one of the pillars of marketing, one of the P's, the 4 P's. It's product, it's price, it's place, which is distribution, and it is promotion. And people always think of marketing as just promotion of the product. But really, if there is not a product, there's nothing to market. And we shouldn't be marketing products if there is not a need for the product in the market. So they are all connected. And you cannot go out and talk about user experience and products without considering what channels you're doing that, where are you selling, where the product lives. In this case, in UX, most of the products live in the digital channel. So that's the place in marketing. Sometimes you have combined stores and channels. Many companies now have both, more than one channel where they promote and sell their products and services. And so that's a piece that needs to be integrated. And of course, pricing. The best product in the world, it doesn't have the right price that people can afford. It doesn't matter how good it is, the experience. So all of that is connected. And that's sometimes what is missed depending on how narrow the focus is of the research. People just don't see the connection. And so I always say, just look at the context, business context, the business goals. That's a piece that UX research needs to kind of look at market research and say, because actually UX research is just, I see it as one of the disciplines in market research. Market research is a multidisciplinary field, has tons of specialties. People think of, when I always ask about market research, the first thing that comes to mind is surveys. Surveys is just one of the many methods. Market research is not the same thing as a method. It's a system of methodologies. There's a lot of categories around it. You have to consider if it's primary, secondary, is it depending on what the objectives are, is it the problem at hand, or is it somebody else developed this research for another objective? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? So as you start using categorization of methods and see how they connect to the business goals, the problems that we need to solve, you'll see that it's much more than surveys. Surveys is just one of them. Surveys is, together with observation, many times they fall on the quantitative side of the equation, but it could be primary, it could be secondary. And observation includes not just in-person observation, which actually on the qual side, but it includes when you do transactional, passive data collection, and web analytics. All that is part of quantitative data that we collect. So it's a big field, just many people don't know.
And this is something why I'm enjoying reading your thoughts, because you're sometimes very well pointing out that UX research, and this is really nice whether you put it as one of the specialties. I never looked at it that way, but that sometimes UX research is a little bit reinventing the wheel. And I would be really interesting. Why do you think so? I mean, I am probably on the same side as you, but let's not spoil. Let's see what you think about it and why you.
Well, I'm always talking about that because I see new names for old stuff all the time. For example, one of the simple ones is sometimes I find UXers in events and I ask them, do you do any research? Yeah, we do. What is it? We talk to users. That's research. And it's like, what exactly do you mean by that? No, we just interview them. We do stakeholder interviews. We do jobs to be done interviews, we do user interviews. And if you really go deeper into what those methods mean, is really they come from in-depth interviews. And in-depth interviews is actually a way of asking questions, oral questions. And that all of that is connected to survey methodology. Survey methodology is not about written questions. There are master degrees in survey methodology. It's a big field too. You really learn about written surveys and oral surveys. And part of that comes from many of the developments in in-depth interviews, which is more individual interviews. You have group interviews, which also called focus groups, or that come from psychotherapy, psychology, a context inquiry, which is combined of observation and in-depth interviews on site. All of that comes from ethnography, psychology, sociology. And if you want to learn about that and you change the names, you're going to lose the connection. You'll not be able to go back and really learn the techniques. They have already been invented a long time ago. And it keeps evolving and developing, and you don't have to start from scratch. If you study that, there is a whole field in what they call here polling. If you go to the American Association for Polling Research, AAPOR, that's where a lot of academic institutions, universities, which have research centers, the federal agencies, the census, the United States Census, you will learn tons about methodology regarding surveys. Of course, you have to ask questions differently when you do it in person or on the phone or in survey. But the core, how you structure questions, the things that you're trying to do, there are some principles that are shared, they're common, and then you start doing adaptations to it. And when you write that type of questions, you have to consider different type of errors that you can introduce, that the user, the respondent can introduce. Think about the analysis you're going to do later on with statistics. So there's a lot of that already, study, and it keeps being developed. But if you're going to reinvent something, if you're going to create something new, you better understand what's the history, where's it come from, and then improve that instead of trying to start from scratch, because you're going to make a lot of errors and you really don't know. You don't have necessarily the methodological background to really do it right. Many times I have seen it. And it's a little bit lazy in a way, because it means that you have to go and study, do the homework before you start trying to create new stuff. And usually innovation doesn't come out of the blue, of nothing. Innovation usually tends to come from different ideas and evolution of things, instead of new idea totally out of the blue with nothing, no background, no history, nothing. That's kind of a myth when it comes to innovation. And that applies to not only to products, but also applies to development of methods. If you think, for example, now the hottest thing in UX is jobs to be done, which doesn't really come from UX. It actually comes from business. It's not a new thing. It's just an adaptation on in-depth interviews, focus on needs, make it a little more operational, trying to connect it to actions and outcomes. But at the core, we're asking questions about the needs of the users, right? What is it you're trying to do, regardless of the method that you are, or the tool, or the process? It's just, what is it actually you're trying to accomplish? We have been doing that type of research for a long time, in product research, in market research, and on the physical world. If you really want to learn about doing good product research, look at the product research done by consumer packaged goods, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, the big companies that put out their physical products. You'll see the principles are really the same, even if the channel is different. you have the digital channel, but we do a lot of product testing with physical products. We send the product home to people and they use it, and we talk to them, we do surveys, we observe. And now with digital it's even easier now, because before you have to have maybe someone there in the house watching, and right now people can just record themselves while they're doing this, and it's the same principle, right? And we can see the interactions, we can see how they use it, we see the bigger context in which the product lives. So when you do, for example, usability testing, you are very focused on that interaction and the navigation and what people are doing on the website, but you're not thinking about what other things people do around that. What are the alternatives? And when that particular interaction comes in the context of other things that people do to solve that particular problem. Like right now, I'm planning a trip. Of course, I'm interacting with the many different websites where I'm booking my trip, my hotels, trying to see where to go, but at the same time asking friends and finding other sources of information around it, how to do this, and the way I interact, my mental models, my expectations, my needs are going to bleed into how I'm looking and using those websites or the apps or whatever it is that I'm using digitally. We want to separate users in how they do things for research purposes, but reality is that people don't separate that. And when you do, even if you focus and you narrow something in the research, you still need to consider the context in which you are doing this, right? And what people are doing. So that's part of the more holistic way of conducting research.
We definitely got into the holistic approach, and this is what I am trying to preach as well. I'm thinking, because I wouldn't like UX researcher just to be stuck on usability, and every senior you speak to, UX researcher tells you like the usability testing is the most boring thing and I don't want to do it, or first click test or preference test or stuff like that. And there's more coming from business where people want to find out like, is it a good idea? But what I found interesting is also how you were pointing out on different examples that we sometimes miss the beginning of, okay, is it a good idea? Not already when the idea is done, just to validate that some product manager or even we or designers had a great idea for a feature, because people don't think in features. Where I'm going with the question, like what actually we have to do before as UX researchers? Where is the opportunity for us to really serve the business?
That's why I keep coming back to the connection to market research and marketing. So the impact of the user experience, the one that you are focusing now as a user researcher, is really mediated by competing alternatives, by pricing, by brand positioning, by the access to distribution channels. All the P's, price, promotion, and all that is part of the business context that needs to be considered when we're designing UX research. And even if you focus on a particular thing, you have to think about that user experience in that context. Even the results needs to be always interpreted in that context. This is what you learn when you do market research. Ideally, the goal is to help businesses to make business decisions. And that's the piece sometimes that I'm missing when I talk to UX researchers, because somehow it has evolved into making money is dirty somehow. It's like, well, you still need to make money to help the business make money to be able to survive. And so the UX researchers need to really understand the context, the business perspective. And I know there is a lot of discussion now about business outcomes, and that goes back to the initial point. I have clients that comes to me and ask for, we want to do testing of this particular app and this particular product. And as we discuss what is it they want to discover on that app, I always ask, are you sure that us users need this app at all? And many times, they don't know. And I know there's more discussion now about discovery research. And even when you do discovery research in UX, it tends to be narrow to a particular digital channel and a particular customer journey. The view of the journey depends on how close you're looking at the interactions. And I look at it in a more holistic way with all the potential touch points across different channels. But you need to start at the beginning, understanding the needs of the users, and the needs have different levels too. So you can have this market level need which usually falls in the market research type of research, more traditional research. And then there is the actual need at the interaction level, or the micro interaction with the product, with the service. Traditionally in market research, when someone says, a company says, we need to acquire new customers or retain customers, that's the main outcomes that many companies have, business outcomes. They need to grow, make revenue, or save money. And that's done by acquiring a customer or retaining customer. In that context, the first question always is, which goal? Which should we go? Should we really develop a new product? Should we redesign existing products? Or is this a product development issue at all? Because it might be just an issue of awareness or brand positioning. You might have a great product, there is a need in the market, but nobody knows about you. Nobody understands your value proposition. So you have to first understand what the problem is. And if it is a product development thing, like people are not liking your products anymore because a competitor came and it's getting into your category, then you need to go understand what are the needs of the product at the highest level, at the key benefits. People don't care about features. People care about the benefits that they get out of those features. Initially, you start with many times with like general concept testing. If there is a need for this app, does the app needs to be digital at all? I mean, there are a lot of questions that will have an impact on business decisions at the very high level. Once you have established that need, then you can go into trying to figure out the product configuration, the features, the specific needs that are part of the hierarchy of needs on that user experience. But you have to start first at the beginning. And I have had clients coming to me saying, we want to do this. And then when they say, well, we really don't know, they have to go back 2 steps and say, well, first let's establish that this is needed, and then we can go and get deep into that. Many times UX researchers are too close to the product. That's the responsibility. That's where they toss. And many organizations don't know how they should be integrated in the bigger goals of marketing and the business. And so many times now falls on the researchers to figure that out for themselves and trying to open and collaborate and see what is the connection of their work to the rest of their business goals, so they can really show the value of the research they do. Even if they just do this little bit, that little bit is connected to something bigger, and that's the piece that sometimes needs to be happening. And the key question many times is that should be keep asking, even if I do my usability testing and I'm trying to figure this out, it's under the condition that there's always the caveat. It's going to be working great, assuming somebody needs this product. Has that question been answered? If not, then we need to try to find the answer for that one. That includes many different type of research. It doesn't have to be necessarily qual or quant. Ideally, it should be both before you get to the usability piece. But you have to understand, if you start with the business outcomes, the business goals, that question will become obvious many times. But what happens in UX research in many organizations that they are not connected to business outcomes. They don't share those business goals with the marketing team. I mean, there are many companies that don't have any market research or marketing team in-house. They just focus on UX only. And that's the piece that it's hard to find the strategic value of the research when you don't have this bigger context of marketing.
And this is maybe, we didn't talk about it in our kickoff, so if I surprise you too much, sorry for that, but I think many UX researchers really want to point out if this product or this feature or whatever new coming up is needed. But what would you say, and you said one example was like doing the usability study, but still pointing out, okay, what are the needs? What is the context? But what it would be, or what you do in order to turn the direction of the client and of the stakeholders towards like, is it really needed?
Well, I usually start when someone comes to me and says, we want to do usability testing and this is the project. I always go back and try to do what I call a problem audit. I wrote recently a blog post about that because I think that's a critical, a lot of companies and teams don't spend a lot of time on the problem definition. That's the main problem, right? The main problem is we don't know what the problem is. many times. So I flip that question around before we start talking about methods. Like they say in English, you're putting the cart in front of the horses. Let's talk about what are the decisions you're going to be making. Let's figure out if that's the real problem that you have. And you will be amazed how many even business stakeholders don't really have a clear idea of what the problem is. They think is one thing. And as you start asking questions, and that's where the business acumen is important. You need to, as a UX researcher, you need to understand the business, not just your little piece of the product. What is the business? Where is the business going? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Where are you as a stakeholder? If I come back to you, I always say, if I come back to you with this little piece of data, what are you going to do with it? And that's where kind of the bulb lights up and say, I don't know if I can do anything with it. So, well, that's probably not then the question that we need to be asking. And so you have to do what is called, actually that comes from also psychology, a laddering technique, which is I have seen now using the jobs to be done type of technique. Again, going back to the roots, you keep asking the why several times. So why will you need to do that? And what is it you're going to be doing? And where are you going with that? And what are the consequences? What are the constraints? Because sometimes there are financial constraints, there are cultural constraints. Sometimes there are a lot of politics, internal politics that play into how you are going to be doing research and using the research and the style of decision making in-house. So you have to become a little bit of a diplomat internally and negotiate where you're going to place the research in decision making. I have had clients that they really like research, but at the end, the balance between the gut feeling and the data, you have to understand that balance too. And what is the style of decision making? Is it one individual making the decision, or is it a committee making the decision? All of that impacts how the research is going to be used and placed in that context. Once you start doing the problem audit and be very clear about what the decisions are, that's how you kind of flip it around. I recently had a meeting with a client. Again, they came with the app. We need an app. We're going to be testing this. They had like 60 screenshots. It's like, you're going to kill the user here. What is it you're trying to really do? We just need to know if people are going to be using the app. Well, do you know what the benefit of the app is? But we have all these interactions, but that's not the benefit. The benefit is what is that they get out of it? What is the problem you're trying to solve? So I keep moving them back and back and back and back. And what was initially thought of a usability test ended up being a more high-level concept testing, trying to figure out what is the main benefit, what is the positioning really. And maybe from there, there's maybe a couple of features that will support that claim. I always recommend UXers to go and watch advertising for hair products from Procter & Gamble. And if you go and look any commercial for that category, you have Pantene, Pro-V Pantene, you'll see there's only one main message. I had an example from British single Ellie Goulding, I think is her name. And she's talking about strong hair. That's her main benefit. I want a strong hair. That's it. And how you get strong hair? Oh, by the way, we have these 3 features. Antioxidants and this compound and this thing. These 3 things. That's the claim. Justification in the why. You can say, yeah, I'm going to get strong hair. It's the same thing. If you're going to tell me that this app is going to solve my problem, make my life easier because in this area, in this particular area, it is because you have these 3 things that's going to make it easier for me. That's what people care about. Then, of course, the next level is, okay, how easy it is to use. How much a hassle is this? If the interaction is not good, if you're going to have troubles and errors. And I just recently, I was trying to make a purchase on a website. It's a pharmacy chain here in the US. I just want to make one thing, one thing. I kept getting so many errors in the app, on the website. It was just the experience was terrible. I tried to call customer service. They dropped my call. And then they sent me a little survey. Will you use it again? I said, no. I mean, the value proposition is great. You're going to make my life easier. I can make a purchase easy, faster. I mean, not easy, but faster. It's available. It's convenient in a way. I don't have to go to the store or anything. Then the experience was terrible. And so you have to understand at what level you are doing the research. Once the need is established, the bigger ask from the user. the bigger benefit. Then you go into the deeper interactions, the barriers, and the friction points that people have in that experience. I mean, a bad experience is going to kill you if you don't do it right. But you have to start with the initial need. Another example I had once a while ago, a company came and say, it's an insurance company that we want to do this app, car insurance. We're going to put all these 30 features in the app and let people to, they're going to compile all the information and about the car and the insurance, and it's going to be great for them. And we kept asking, do people really need this? Yeah, they shouldn't. Nobody has done any research to really figure out if that people need this. So I said, well, let's do that first initial step of exploring the bigger need. And you can look at how people were solving this. Nobody was willing to pay for that. They already had their own habits on capturing that information, their system. And at the end, they could do it. Of course, a lot of barriers and you needed to break down. And then the business have to consider how much does it cost me? How long does it take? How much effort just to do something that very few are going to use, right? And so that's the piece where you have to go back to the constraints, the business goals, the information that you need at different levels to decide on should we go with this or not. So many times my research is coming back and giving the bad news like, yeah, I don't think you should be doing this. And sometimes they just look at the data and say, yeah, it's pretty clear. Not at this time. Maybe in the future, when needs change, when other things happen in the market that may make people ready for this solution, but right now might not be the right time to do it. And I get always this pushback about the fast horse metaphor with Ford. When if we ask people if they need a car, they will, what is it they need? They need fast horses, and that's a narrow and lazy definition of users' needs. Of course, people sometimes cannot see in front of themselves how they could, what is it they need. That's okay. People react to things. They cannot necessarily generate things because they are not really involved. That's not their job. They are not in that category. But depending on the level of involvement, they might give you more or less ideas. But that's not the job of the user is not come up with new ideas for you. Yeah, the researcher needs to find ways of understanding the needs and then derive what are the potential solutions to meet that need. But don't say that we don't need research because if we ask them, they would never know. It's never about asking directly, what do you think? Tell me. You have to pay them if they're going to be doing all that thinking for you to come up with new ideas. It is your role as a researcher to really extract as much information as possible with different methods, not always direct, questioning, and just come up with solutions and then put it in front of them and see how people react to it. But that's a simplistic way of looking at research when it comes to new product ideas. There's a lot of thinking and work that has to go into that process to be able to extract things from the research. That's insights, essentially. It's not data, it's the insights that you can derive from the data. And that's one of the problems too with the trend now with a lot of do-yourself research, faster, cheaper. There's really not a lot of thinking time. People don't have budgets and enough resources to allocate for thinking time and derive the insights. There's a lot of focus on data collection, and that seems to be easier, faster, cheaper, but this is the back end. That's where the value is for the research. And so even in the market research industry, the big focus now is on what they call a res tech. Of course, now everything has a tech in the name. We're going from the X to the tech or at the same time, and trying to let the machines do everything with artificial intelligence and all that, and automation. But we are forgetting the insights really comes from humans still. And we need time, thinking time, to be able to analyze that and come up with ways of extracting those insights. And that's the piece that sometimes is missed. And UX is very much into do-yourself, which I have another point on that is it can be isolating and narrow and doesn't allow really researchers to grow. And too much focus on things that are not necessarily add a lot of value. So there are a lot of tech tools now that allow you to collect data. All that can be cheaper and faster. that's fine. Don't spend too much time on it, but then use all that time to really do the actual analysis and synthesis and reporting for learning, future learnings too. Somebody was saying the other day in LinkedIn that they didn't do reports because who cares? I mean, who's going to have time for that? And nobody's going to read in the future. It's like you're losing a lot of knowledge in that process. You do a lot of research, you don't report it, you don't document it, nothing gets into, there's no memory of what you did. So every time you have to do it all over again, reinvention and starting it from scratch. And it's just because that takes time, that takes resources. And you have to define where you find the value. And there's always an opportunity cost to do your self-research. It could be cheaper and faster on the face, but there's an opportunity cost long term where you don't really do more strategic type of research that can advance the business, advance you as a researcher many times.
I'm just wondering, because you briefly stretch it, and this is where we don't want to talk about the methods, but I will still like to have your perspective on it, because one of the very important thing is reinventing the methods all over again. And there are big names in the business which tell you, like, don't put demographics, or don't use personas, or don't put demographics into personas, or jobs to be done, it's the only method because it's looking not at the people. And I know you've been vocal about this, and I would like to look into this one because I think there is a strong message too from your side.
So once you define the problem, I would say that sometimes to define the problem, you have to always start with secondary research. I always recommend that. And secondary research is probably the cheapest, the fastest way to explore a problem if you don't have enough information, or if you have already defined a problem, to find at least initial nuggets to answer some of the questions you have. So secondary research is done for purposes other than your own. So that's where you go to industry reports, or product category reports, or data collected by something else, even internal collected data, transactional data, sales data, web analytics. Those are secondary research data because it was not really collected for the primary purpose of your research. It's just there for other purposes, but it might have some nuggets of information that might be useful for you. And the problem with secondary research is that it's usually not specific enough for your needs. You still need to follow up with something else. You need to keep doing more research. And that's where primary research comes in, right? And primary research could be qualitative, quantitative. It's about the goal. This is research designed for your particular objective, to solve the problem at hand. And you can start with qualitative methods. You can do, if you want to explore needs, again, depending on at what level we're going, high level market needs or interaction product level needs, you still might start with qualitative research, focus groups, in-depth interviews, ethnographic observation, like digital diaries. You need to have a sense for many different approaches. There are tons of that in market research. By the way, market research do qualitative research a lot, tend to specialize in one or the other based on preferences and personalities. I do both, but that's kind of rare many times because it requires different type of skills. So you're going to go deep in quant and also deep in qual. It's a switch in the brain. Doing both at the same day is almost impossible. It's too exhausting, but it can be done. And so you might start with that, with the qual, and then you still should be doing some validation with quantitative research. And quantitative research could be surveys, could be passive data collection, could be some experimental design. And I know many times qualitative researchers don't like to hear about validation because it feels like, oh, you're saying that what I'm doing is not valid. No. What I'm talking about validation is qualitative research generates a lot of great idea. I love it. It's rich in data, rich in nuances. We just still need to understand the magnitude of your findings. So what I'm talking about validation is how big is it, this problem or need, that is worth investing in. You can find tons of stuff in qual, but it might be just things for, small segments of that population universe. Because remember, the business have to make an investment and they have to get a sense for how many people are we going to be reaching with this product or service. And the qual, just because the way the sample is designed they tend to be very narrow. It's not representative enough. You're not really necessarily capturing all potential segments in your user population. So you might happen to have 5 people in all, come from a particular segment, and then you will be only reflecting results from that segment. Or you might have people from many different segments, but then you still don't know how big they are to be able to say, okay, should we focus on this or that, if you have a lot of variability in the data. So qualitative research the main goal is exploratory. We want to surface some hypothesis on what the needs are, what the problems might be. And then we still need to go and validate. Many times we do, depending on time and budget, we go the other way around. We start with quant. We might do what is called, there is exploratory quantitative research too. When you do a market segmentation, there is what is called empirical segmentation. You really don't know what you're going to find. You just try to ask as many questions as possible in different dimensions, psychographics, demographics, behavior, all type of variables, just to see if you see a pattern, if there are some groupings. So you have to do statistics to be able to find those groups. And then sometimes you can follow up with qual and you go deeper, because quantitative research is probabilistic. There is a trend. Nobody is 100% one thing or the other. We just have tendencies to do and behave and need certain things. Of course, there are situational factors, and sometimes they're used as invalidating criteria by people that don't really have an understanding of statistics. They say, well, that person is not 100%, doesn't meet all the criteria in this segment, so that segmentation is wrong. It's not. It's just you have to know what are the other variables, increasing the probability that someone is going to be behaving in a particular way or selecting, having certain type of preferences. And so what you want is to go into the qual and get a richer profiling sometimes. And when it comes to personas in particular, because it's connected to segmentation, personas is just another name for segment profiling. And if you profile a particular group, and say, call it that's a persona, you better have data to back up that persona exists in real life. Not necessarily one individual, but it's a slice of the population of your market that is stable enough so you can really talk about them in general terms. And so you make it look like one person because you maybe pick some attributes to make it alive and relatable to stakeholders. And that's a trend that started actually marketing many years ago. That's not an UX thing, but it started marketing because when we do market segmentations, they tend to be huge studies, like big samples, 1,000, 2,000 people, because you need to have enough sample to be able to slice and dice and find trends and patterns in the data. And if you just present percentages, it gets a little dry, hard to communicate, too much data. People get really overwhelmed by that. We have to, when we communicate segmentation studies, probably it's like you have to do like a workshop, half day, a whole day, just to be able to digest all that, because it's tons of data. And so a way of, when storytelling came in vogue in marketing, it's like we need to communicate data through storytelling. Then these personas came, scenarios came, like, oh, let's bring that segment, to life. And this is Tina. She lives here. She has an average age of this, and she does that and that and that. And to give you something to connect, some heuristics to talk about that segment. And they call it sometimes even names, like this is Tina segment, this is Michela segment. And that over time got confused with the fact that we can now come up with personas with no data. It seems to be the jump. So you have internal teams, many times salespeople, because they are interacting with customers. They see some patterns in their interactions, and they think they know what this, the users are, the buyers are, and they say, we have these personas. But what you can see in many companies is over time, those personas don't live long. They die very quickly because there's no data behind them. They are not stable enough to survive changes and more in-depth analysis. And even market segmentations, depending on the category, the shelf life as we call it. If there's a category that changes a lot, it's a new competition, new technologies, the market is changing quickly, they might last for 2 years, and then you have to renew, refresh, find new segments because things are changing. So it's not like you do one segmentation that's for life. In the product categories, the segmentations are focused on product categories many times, unless you're doing some type, life stage type of segmentation, more on the sociology side of things. When it comes to commercial segmentations, that has to usually connect it to what people are doing and needing and behaving, preferences in a particular category. And that changes. I did a segmentation for a client 10 years ago. We found segments. This was for a retailer in the automotive category. That was before Amazon was selling a lot of auto parts. And so we have people were behaving in different ways. Before YouTube came, and you can do anything and learn anything watching YouTube, right? And so before that, people were behaving in certain ways, buying certain things, having certain preferences. When that market shift came and other things became available, people started behaving in different ways, having other needs. So now, 10 years later, they wanted to reproduce the same thing and said, well, I don't think it's going to be valid. We run again because they insisted. So I'm going to prove it to you. And everybody was in one segment. Before we had 4, now those differences disappear because people are now behaving in a different way. And so we have to go back and we run a qualitative study trying to figure out the customer journey and what people did and need and prefer in each of the stages up till they came, because they were just a retailer. They were actually the last stop in the journey. We have to understand the full journey from when the problem for the user started until they got to the retailer where they're going to buy the product to solve that problem. But in the middle, there were a lot of stops and decisions that people have to make, and where the client could go in and help that so they could guide them to their own store. But you have to understand the full journey. And things change in the market. And so when you come and talk about personas and there is no data, there's no actual segmentation behind it, I guarantee you those personas are going to die pretty soon. They're not going to have a lot of evidence to justify them. You're going to be questioned in the C-suite because now you're telling the decision makers, oh, use these groups to make a strategy for the company. The company is going to need data. So that's why you need to have kind of arsenal of different tools, understanding both qual and quant, and decide what is it we need to do that. Of course, timing and budget always are factors in there. So you have to design research considering all those factors. And I come back to the issue of define the problem first before you start deciding on methods.
We could go further into different methods and looking at, because it's beautiful how you were working on segmentation and explored the journey and came to different touch points. But if I go step back to the personas, I saw you in some discussion about having demographics and not having demographics in the context of diversity and inclusion, and many people consider now personas to not to be inclusive, and you are more on a side it might make you more inclusive, what I found interesting.
Yeah, and I have seen those discussions on LinkedIn, and it shows you the lack of understanding of sociological variables in the user experience. People are more than a user of a product. They live in the context of whatever they are. We all, as human beings, belong to different groups and at different levels. So our close group is our family, then comes friends, there is our community, there's our city, and there's the country. So there is a lot of layers of identity that is part of who we are. And demographic variables by themselves don't mean a lot, but they mean always in the context of the cultural values associated with them, right? Just as simple as gender. What does that mean to be a woman and a man in different cultures, in different countries? And what all the connotation when you say male and female? And that's why we have all these cultural wars about sexual orientation and transgenders. If that would not be an issue, if that demographic piece of information was not important, we wouldn't have these type of discussions about gender differences and the Me Too movement and all that. It has sociological, cultural connotations. Age is the same. Different age groups, depending on the times they live, the events they're exposed to, they're going to have different views of life. And we have done research where you can see how different groups see the same thing from different perspectives. Race is another variable that really has a lot of impact. It will vary depending on the country where you are, but here in the US, given the history of the country, there is a lot of discrimination against Blacks and non-white groups. So if you don't consider those variables, you're going to be discriminating people because you are not necessarily understanding the things, the values attributed to sometimes features that are important to them. I'm going to give you a simple example that was brought to me by, I was talking to a group of Black researchers, and Black consumers in the US are trendsetters here. They are the ones who define many times, although they are appropriated by other groups, but trends in fashion and products in many product categories. The icons to represent females. If you look at how the hair is designed, it indicates, it signals straight hair. Just that simple. Well, we know that hair, natural hair in many non-whites and Black African American is just curly hair. Different types, there are like 9 categories of them, but they're essentially curly many times. And just looking at that piece, they immediately don't feel represented. And I work particularly in that category. I do a lot of work in the hair category. And I can see when opportunities are lost and there's a lot of misunderstanding, when you have a whole team of researchers, they are just white women trying to sell and produce products for Black consumers, Black women with curly hair. They don't see it because that's not how they relate to. That's not their point of reference. That's not their experience, individual experience. So that's why diversity is important in representation in the research groups. Not only the research participants, but also the research teams, because we all bring our own biases, our own culture, our own experiences, and we need to have others to keep us in check. We're always going to have biases. That's part of our brain works. And so you need to have diversity. And when you do research, it's not necessarily how you actually do the nitty-gritty of the research, but in the design of the sample, you can do perfect methodology and might be biased in the sample and might be biased in the interpretation. Many times there's no questions about the methodology, but then the interpretation of the results is where the bias come in. And if you don't consider the gender, the age, the race, the religion, whatever the variable is that is relevant to your product category, and some of them are really relevant and others are less relevant. So you have to always get that in context. So I always said, well, demographics may or may not be important for this, but if you don't know, capture that information and then analyze it later and see, okay, does it make a difference or not? But not just come a priori under the assumption without any data that says, we don't care about that, we should not be looking at that, because you are going to be missing, you're going to probably be discriminating. There's a lot of discussion in the US community about disabilities. And if you don't ask about that, you will never know if you are excluding people because they might have any type of disability. It's the same thing. If you are developing an app for example, in some categories like dating, have also done work in that area. There are a lot of niche people. When they date, there's some criteria they consider. For example, religion and political affiliation and race. Of course, age and gender they're kind of a given. But people, because of cultural factors, might prefer to just date within their own group. So if you don't consider that, you're going to be missing big time if you are developing an app for trying for everybody. And so for each category, we know the demographics. If you have been doing market research a long time, you realize that some categories demographics are really, really important and others have less, but they are, we call it covariates. They kind of mediate some of the approaches to products and services. They might not differentiate segments up front, like maybe it's not necessarily, you might find some things that's not different by gender or not different by age, but you might find big difference by race. And so you shouldn't a priori assume that they don't matter. They always give you context. Demographics give you context about the world they're living in. And right now, with so much cultural wars in place, which usually hints on religion and gender and race, it's very hard to argue for not including them. You should always include them and then see if they make a difference or not. I'm not saying that they do. I'm saying as a researcher, you should capture the information and analyze it.
Michaela, maybe the last question to summarize what you are trying to tell the listeners, or not you, but what we were trying to give away as a message. What should be, in your opinion, an integral part of every researcher's work?
I would say in terms of the process, first, conduct a problem audit. Identify what the problem is, what the decision is at play, what course of action should be taken, translate that into the research problem. I would direct you to just look at the longer blog on problem audits. So I think that's so important and is so underrated and totally ignored many times because people are in a rush to do things. But many bad decisions are made when the problem is ill-defined. And so start with the clear definition of the problem and the level of decision that is made. The second is always, of course, connect that to business outcomes. Consider that in where the business is going. If you don't know, ask. Find the people who know. There's always people who know, and try to understand how your tactical or project is connected to strategic goals. It will really elevate the function of research and your value as a researcher. Never forget, you are the voice of the customer, of the user. That's fine, but you still need to help the business to stay in business, at least if you think that making money is dirty. And get a good foundation on principle of methodology, both qual and quant. I know some people prefer numbers, some people don't like numbers. You don't have to do it yourself. That means collaborate. Consider the cost of do it yourself, the hidden cost, the opportunity cost, the things that you could be doing instead of that would add more value. Remember, no method is perfect. No one method is going to give you everything you need. No user interviews, no usability testing, no focus group, no surveys. They're going to give you all the answers. Ideally, you should use mixed methods to give you different perspective. But sometimes there is no time or money to do that. But just know the limitations. Don't present it as is. This is it. These are all the answers. Never know. It's just one perspective. And be big on caveats, right? But you have to know the methodologies to be able to defend them and propose the right one. Otherwise, you're going to be prisoner of the law of the hammer. When you have a hammer, everything is going to look like a nail. You don't want that as a researcher. But it's easy because some companies, they stay in that lane. You create expectations, always the same type of research. And so you don't grow, the company doesn't grow, you really don't solve the problems that need to be solved. And that's why I always recommend collaboration, not only internally with other groups, but also bring outside resources, bring research vendors, suppliers. They're going to have the expertise that you won't have, or your team have. If you're going to have all the expertises, all the specialties needed in research, you're going to have a big research team. And then you are in the business of research, which is not your business, right? Internally, you're going to have a hard time justifying that. And so the market research industry has gone through that phase already. It goes back and forth. Sometimes it's all do yourself, sometimes it's all vendors. Ideally, my experience as a researcher in both sides, because I have worked on the internal teams too, is just collaboration. It's always a hybrid model where you can have a small team but bring experts as needed for different type of projects, not for all of them, but some pieces of the projects on different type of projects, strategic and tactic, depending on your own skills and resources. So collaboration, open your mind to that and bring resources, and you can justify having a budget for that. And finally, be aware of your own biases, your cultural biases. That's why diversity is important, because you are many times blind to your own biases. You'll not be able to catch them themselves, even you're vigilant. Knowing what you don't know is very hard. And so you need a diverse team. You need a perspective, people who can point out, they can complement. You need a diversity of methodologies, of people, of skills, of people with experience in different adjacent research fields, and that will really complement and enrich your perspective and the value of the research. But again, don't stop at the research piece. You have to go the next step, which is the harder one, is the implementation of the insight. And that's where you need to include the stakeholders. The stakeholders don't have to do the research. That's another thing. This is our democratization of research. They expect everybody's going to do. No, stakeholders are interested or time. They're not getting paid to do that work. So don't expect them to do the research, but you have to find ways to involve them in the problem definition and ideally observation of the process if they can. At the end, in the insights implementation, you have to be able to communicate the results, the insights, and help them make the decisions. That's where the implementation comes. If you do all the research and then it goes to a shelf and collect dust, the value is lost. You have to be able to make it actionable. That's the piece that sometimes requires more work and thinking time. So you have to advocate for that. If you're a research manager, please find time to give your team time to think about the insights implementation. That's where the value is. That's where you can really bring research alive. The actual doing of the research, which is, I know now is a big thing with research operations, that really has, for the business, has less value than what you do with the research. Again, nobody cares about the features, or how you do it. What they care is what they get out of it. And the same thing applies to research. You have to make sure you do it right, that you have a team who can do it right. But the business itself, the stakeholders, they don't care. In that way, they care is like, you did it right. I'm assuming that you do it right. You know, you're an expert. You know what you're doing. Now tell me, I can trust you. This is a good research. Now help us to figure out what to do with it. Help us to figure out what decisions we should be going for. At the end, at the highest level, that's our role.
Last but not least, where to follow you? We'll for sure link to the blog post about the problem auditing. But where to follow you? Where would you like to be followed?
Well, you can always find me on LinkedIn at Michaela Mora, and also our website, relevantinsights.com. I am on Twitter too. Sometimes when I have time, I do some of that, but our insights, you can follow me there. But those are the three main things. LinkedIn is where you can find me faster, or on my website, relevantinsights.com.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your wisdom.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been lovely talking to you.